So you got all this sugar coming into your bloodstream, and you have increased mental activity, but you're going totally on instinct. You're not creating anything. You're not thinking about the future. You're just thinking about how do I save my life, and you get an increased metabolic rate. All right. So because they need to run fast, they need to fight hard, they need to have quick energy. All right. So they get this flood of glucose. They need to be lightweight. You know how they are lightweight? They empty their bowels. Okay. So they don't not carrying around any extra weight. So that's why a lot of times when you get nervous, you feel like you have diarrhea because your body thinks you got to run and fight. You have to think quickly. So you have to go on instinct, and you have to block pain, because even if you get injured, you got to keep running. All right. So what you don't need if you're a zebra, you don't need to worry about reproduction. So your hormones get put in the back burner. You don't want to have insulin resistance. You're not trying to store energy. You're putting that glucose out there because you need it right now. Now you want everything to be run on cortisol. You don't want your thyroid to be activating things that you don't need. So it shuts down your thyroid. You don't need to be wasting energy on trying to digest food right then, because you got to use the energy that you already have stored up. So you stop digesting food. You don't want to waste water, so you actually hold on to water because you want to have more blood volume, so it's less likely you're going to bleed out if they cut an artery or a vein. So you're actually trying to hold on to fluid. And then the last thing you want to do is is fall asleep while you're in the middle of a fight, or you're in the middle of a running away from your predator. So for a zebra, that all makes sense. You want that stress response. It just makes perfect sense. But that's why zebras don't get ulcers, because here's the thing. If you win the fight or you win the race, then you're going to go back and graze and just hang out and do zebra stuff. All right. So your cortisol is going to go down. Your stress level is going to go down. If you lose the fight or if you lose the race, you're going to get eaten. And you know what happens? Your stress response stops. So either way, you're going to have a quick on and off of your stress response. Okay. So that makes sense. Now, the problem with us is that you don't have to see the predator. All you have to do is think about the stress. You can think about your boss arguing at you that morning or every morning. You can think about your mother-in-law coming and living with you. Okay. You can think about the bill collector calling you, and you're going to turn on the stress response. And we turn on the stress response 24/7. But what happens is you get the threat, you get that biological response. All your blood's going to your muscles, it's going away from your stomach, it's doing all these things that should happen if you were going to run a fight. But it doesn't stop. And so now you have this continuous threat, this continuous abnormal biologic response, and that's going to lead to symptoms, and that's going to lead to illness. All right. So the stress response is great when it's used properly. Okay. You're picking up a car off your kid. Yeah. You're not worried about the future. You're not worried about digestion. You're not worried about anything. You need all that energy to go into your arms and legs to push that car up. But then that's just going to happen for about 5 minutes at the most. Then you're going to say, oh my God, I'm so happy. And, and the stress response goes away. All right. Am I making sense, Rebel?
Yes, most definitely.
Okay. So here's what happens. All right. You're sitting at home eating dinner, but you're stressed out because your boss yelled at you. So your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, you get increased heart contractions, and we call that panic attacks. Okay. You get increased blood flow to active muscles, and this is why your muscles hurt. If you put a lot of glucose in the system and you're needing to run and fight, what happens is that glucose goes down this pathway called lactic acid. And lactic acid is what builds up when you go and work out in the gym for an hour. I did leg days Saturday and my legs still hurt, okay, because of lactic acid. All right. So even if you're thinking about this and all of this glucose is going in your muscles are going to hurt even though you didn't run or fight. That is fibromyalgia. All right. You get decreased blood flow to areas not needed for rapid activities like your kidneys and intestines. So you're going to hold on to water. So you might have swelling and you're not going to digest your food. You're not going to get the energy that you should get from your food. And then also you can have diarrhea because remember, you're trying to be lightweight. So you get this diarrhea. I need to empty out my bowels even before I digest my food, because what happens is it slows down your stomach and it speeds up your colon. So you get diarrhea, and you also get this indigestion because you're stressed and your body says it's not time to digest. Your pupils dilate, so you look like a crazy man. You talk about crazy eyes. You get dilated bronchial tubes. You increase muscular strength. You're getting the strength, but you're not using it. You get release of glucose from the liver, so that shoots up your blood glucose, so that can increase your risk of diabetes. You get increased mental activity. That's your attention deficit disorder. You're paying attention to everything because you're trying to figure out where to run or fight, okay, or where to run from. Where should you go and run? And then you get an increased metabolic rate, right? So all this is happening, and there's no predator around. And this is why we wrote the book called The Stress Connection. I know you can't see this, but just believe me. Stress is connected to every organ system in your body. It affects your brain. And that people come in and say they have foggy thinking or they can't pay attention. It affects your skin. You ever broken out in hives because you were so nervous? It affects your muscles and joints. We just talked about that. It affects your heart. It affects your cardiovascular system. It affects your stomach. It affects your pancreas by pumping out too much glucose. It affects your intestines by slowing down the upper part of your gut and speeding up the lower part of your gut. It screws up your reproductive system because your hormones are out of whack. And it primarily screws up your immune system. And that's what increases your risk of cancer. You have these things called natural killer cells that come out when you are relaxed and when you are asleep. And if you're not getting good sleep, you don't have those natural killer cells that are finding cancer cells before they ever show up in a biopsy. And so it increases your risk of cancer. So everything is connected to stress, okay? 75 to 90% of the time, if you think it's stress, you're going to be right, okay? So here are all the stresses that we're dealing with 24/7. We have the stress of the pollution that's in our air. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a big city. So every time I walk outside, I'm breathing in something that's stressing out my immune system. We have these deadlines. Hey, I got to be on this podcast at 9 o'clock every morning. It's a deadline. I got to have my slides ready. All right. Heat, these different temperature changes. Here in Atlanta, it can be 50 degrees one day, 80 degrees the next day. We overload ourselves with all of these things we have to do. These parents who have to take their kids to all this travel baseball and travel basketball, and then they have to make A's in school, and then they have to get into the right school. Then you have to go on a college tour and all of this stuff. We always are dealing with family relationships, okay? Sick parents, sick children, all of these things. Everybody's concerned about their finances now. We're dealing with death of our parents and death of loved ones. And then we're dealing with illnesses with kids and friends. So all of this, these are examples of the stressors that we're dealing with, and they don't go away. You have to be able to rise above all of this noise that's going on in your life. And you have to be able, and this is where meditation comes in, quiet your mind so that you can think about how you can change these situations or change how you respond to the situations. When you are in the middle of the fight or in the middle of the flight or the escape, you are not thinking about how to change your future. Okay, so because you're thinking about this all the time. All right, so what you don't need if you are a human, you don't need to run fast. You don't need to fight hard. You don't need quick energy. You need a steady flow of energy. You don't need to be lightweight. So you don't need to empty your bowels. You don't need to think quickly. In order to change things, you have to be contemplative. You need to think deeply, not quickly. And you don't necessarily need to block pain. Things you do need if you're a human. Even though you're dealing with your finances and you're with your sick kids and with your dying parents, you would still like for your reproductive system to work. But stress causes hormone disruption, all right? Even though you're dealing with this, you would still like to use energy efficiently. But that's what causes insulin resistance. We have all this glucose out, then your insulin, you become resistant to insulin because your body thinks you need all this glucose. All right. Then that gets stored as fat, and then you have a high hemoglobin A1C and so